Perfect. So a big welcome to our webinar today, Design Thinking, a Snapshot. And that's exactly what it's going to be. I have about 45 minutes, and this is a topic I'm passionate about. So I wanted to share with you a little bit of background as to, what is design thinking, why is it important, who are we at the UP Center for Executive Education, and why is design thinking such an important tool for change makers. And then I wanted to walk you through an example of design thinking that might be very practical, but really is to illustrate how you might be able to use it in different contexts. And in the last 5 to 10 minutes, we would also like to tell you about a process that we have that's much more in depth if design thinking is something that you want to get further in depth and feel like that's something that could be valuable to you in different contexts. So that's the plan for the 45 minutes. And then I'll stay on for up to 15 minutes more if there are questions, comments, things that you want to exchange. So I've blocked the hour for this, and a big welcome again to everybody. And so, here I just want to acknowledge that we have a very, very diverse group of participants who join us from around the world for our processes. We are, as you can see from my backdrop, we are based in Costa Rica, the international headquarters of the University for Peace. But maybe as you come in now, type in which city, country you're joining us from. Just I'll give you about 30 seconds. Maybe everyone won't get to it, but I already see Emily from Washington, Marissa Trinidad, welcome. Okay, we've got Brazil, Recife, a place I haven't yet made it to, in Costa Rica, Nosara, Malta, Indonesia. I myself am in Florida today, was in Costa Rica yesterday, Guatemala. So huge welcome to all of you from all places and corners of the world. And I recognize with time difference, sometimes some of you often are taking this at late hours. So thank you for being here. And here, this is just a quick also pulse check on why are you here. So we'll just continue to use the chat box for this. Often I set up polls, but in the short time, I'll just ask you to chat in a number. So one would be, I'm just curious about design thinking. That's what brings me here. Second option, number two, is I want to bring this back to my team. We're working on some kind of complex challenge, and I want to implement it. And the third is maybe that it's you're as an individual, you're ready to implement it. It could be in a personal or professional context. And then some of you might already love design thinking and like a design thinking groupie. You just, every time you see design thinking, you're there because you want to learn more, you want to. So Gerardo is a design thinking groupie. I'll put myself in that category. When I see design thinking, I go there. Okay, 2 and 3, 4, 2. Okay, Eduardo, 2, 3. Nice. So great to see that you're here for different reasons. And I think all of you should find, oh, I hope you find value in it, even if you are at that level 4, like Wendy, you just said that you love design thinking. So great, thank you. Gloria, also somebody who is very fond of design thinking. So let's get into it then. Thank you everyone for responding. When you hear the word innovation, what are 1, 2, or 3 words that come to mind for you? So you hear innovation. So just chat it in here. Technology, creativity. Marissa says new way of doing things, new solutions, new improvement, impact. Empathy, Gerardo, creativity, it's empathy, and we'll talk about empathy as the first step of design thinking. Nice. So value, adding value, improving some things, right? And so, yes, there is, I think at the heart of design thinking, you will see that everything that has been shared in the chat box is really part of this. And I want to start with a maybe more, I would say, formal understanding of innovation. This comes to us from IDEO. And the idea that for innovation to take place, three things have to come together. There needs to be, we need to want it, right? That's the desirability, right? There needs to be a need, if that makes sense, because sometimes we can come up with cool, new, interesting stuff that nobody uses. So desirability, and then viability, or let's start with feasibility. We need to be able to build it. We can dream it, but can we actually build it, right? We might dream of things. Certainly, I myself, and some of you might have thought about time travel. Wouldn't that be neat? Well, I don't know yet of a way that anyone has come up with making that feasible. So it has to be buildable, and then at a cost that's doable, that's viability. So the idea of going to the moon as a tourist, I think that's a super innovative, creative idea. But right now you have to, I live in Florida, so the NASA launching station is about 2 hours drive north. You can go to the moon as a tourist, but the business cost for that makes it a very, very small segment of tourists who can afford that. So when those three things come together, people actually want it, it's doable, and it's at a cost that is accessible, at least to the demand. Then something really emerges and enters the market. So that's a little bit of the formal definition of innovation. And now I want to get into design thinking. Design thinking encourages creative thinking in order to try and solve complex challenges, right? Because often innovation is responding to complex challenges. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that when I first got introduced to design thinking, I remember thinking, you know what, this is not rocket science. These steps make sense to me. And I realized that I often miss one or more of the steps. And so what I'm going to do in this webinar is really go through these 5 steps and illustrate them. So just as since we're looking at the slide now, the first step is it starts with empathy. Empathy for who? For the person you're trying to design for. It seems obvious, we often miss this. The second step is once you do empathy, then you can really define what is it, the problem or the challenge I'm solving, right? The third step is ideate, fancy word for brainstorming. And here the idea is don't lock in on your first best idea. And I'll tell you why later. Fourth step of design thinking is now let's try it out. Giving yourself permission to experiment, to act. Often we go into our heads, what if, and maybe, and try it out in a way that's quick and that's flexible. You test it, you get some feedback, and then you iterate. Okay, so those are the 5 steps of design thinking. And so let's see. You know what? I see a number of people in the waiting room. Let me just admit there are a few people. I'll just have them join us because we will go through this again. So,
and you can make me co-host, Mohit, so I can do that for you.
Oh, okay. Oh, I thought you were already from Esme. Okay, let me just make sure that you are co-host Paula. Paula, by the way, is on the Centers team. She's here with me, and I'll make sure, Paula, that questions that come in, you can monitor the chat box. Paula, please feel free to jump in at any point, and certainly if people are interested in the longer process we have, I'll leave it mainly up to you. So
that's good.
Perfect. So, why at the University of Peace should we care about something around innovation and design thinking? Well, if design thinking is about complex challenges, look at the level of complexity that we at the University for Peace are looking at, right? And I know it's a 60-word mission statement. So really just the aspiration with which the University for Peace was established by the United Nations back in 1980 was to look at the complex challenge of how do we actually teach and enable people to have the skills to lessen some of the I would say some of the barriers to peace, but really the positive side. How do we encourage tolerance, understanding, peaceful coexistence, right? So you can imagine the complexity around our mission. So it's not surprising that we've gotten very interested in the area of innovation. And personally, So I started the UP's Center for Executive Education about 15 years ago. And my kind of approach to design thinking came from the field of social entrepreneurship. I had a business background originally. I was actually an industrial engineer at Stanford University, where a lot of the work on design thinking has come out in the last couple of decades. So I was fortunate to be in an environment where some of the thinkers around design thinking were articulating and making available their methodology. But frankly, it was a few years after I had graduated, and when I was at Costa Rica at the, I was putting together this idea of how do we make impact, positive impact, but in a financially sustainable way. And so I was approaching it from the angle of social entrepreneurship when I realized we just need a process to help social entrepreneurs with complex challenges. And so that was my kind of falling in love with design thinking about a decade ago now. So some of you I know I've had courses with, and those of you who put a 4, I would love to continue to connect. You'll just see at the middle of that slide, learn and teach what I love. So I love design thinking. I always feel that I'm learning as I interact and think about it. So that's a little bit about me, because I will be offering the 4-week course on design thinking for those of you who are interested. So what's the context that we're living in? An interesting context, right? Interesting in the sense that we've always, throughout human history, had change, right? It's part of our bodies change, therefore our societies, our organizations change. But several historians have noted that in no time previously in human history have we ever experienced the pace of change that we're experiencing now. And by now, I don't mean in a post-pandemic or in a pandemic world. I'm talking about the 21st century, right? The pandemic certainly put an extra, turbo charge on rapid change that we were already experiencing. And that will pass. What won't pass is the pace of change in this century. So that's the context. And VUCA, many of you may have heard the term. We live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And that creates a certain level of discomfort, also requires completely new approaches to making plans, right? Plans for oneself. What am I going to do in 5 years? Please don't ask me that question, or ask me and then be prepared to have coffee with me for an hour. But the other thing is, how do we plan professionally also, right? Even at the center, when we make plans, we use a design thinking approach, right? My guess is that 50 years ago, IBM used to come up with 3 to 5 year plans. Very hard to do that now in this VUCA world that we live in. So that's the context. Now, remember, this is what design thinking, these 5 steps, especially for those of you who are in the waiting room, I just went over that. Fundamentally, design thinking says for any complex challenge, if you're starting off, start with empathy, then you define the challenge, then you ideate a bunch of possible solutions before you give yourself permission to prototype or try 1 or 2 quickly and test it. So what I thought we could do is let's try this out with an actual kind of complex challenge. Might that be a good idea, just to kind of run through an example? So let's do this with the fun challenge of getting a gift, right? So imagine that you were trying to get better at gift giving. That's the complex challenge you've taken on. So let's start with the first step, which is empathy. So I'm going to personalize this because I love design thinking and I struggle with giving gifts. Often the question that I ask myself is, what would I like to gift my friend? Like what's easy for me to buy, or what would I love if I got? I often center the question around me. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to see whose face can I see. I think that people who are a lot wiser than me in this room, but any thoughts on what's a better empathy question to ask instead of what would I love to get as a gift? Any thoughts? Feel free to type it in. Feel free to go off mute. Yes, that's right. What would my friend like? What would make him or her happy? Right. So that's the empathy piece, is really thinking about the person you're designing for. Yeah. And so I often buy chocolate for everybody I love. As you can guess, I'm a chocolate lover myself, and I make the leap of faith. If you hang out with me, you gotta love chocolate. It works about 80% of the time, but there's dark chocolate, there's light chocolate, and it doesn't work 20% of the time. So yeah, so it's really about trying to focus in on the user, the client, the customer, the beneficiary, if you're in the social sector. But that's what empathy is about, right? And so I'm going to start sharing screen again here so we can follow along with the visuals. So thank you. So this is a quote from Einstein, and he says, you know, if I had only 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. So I would say that if you have an hour to get the gift, you know, I'm now kind of taking this to the gift giving, you should spend 55 minutes trying to figure out what would really make your friend happy. Because the next 5 minutes you can spend, you know, on Amazon ordering it, or so that analogy is, it's not so much about the logistics of getting the gift, it's about what would make that person happy. And defining that challenge is much easier once you've done the empathy. So in my case, let's go with the gift giving. So let's say I've just figured out that my fairly new friend, who I thought I would give, let's say, chocolate to, is actually doesn't like chocolate and doesn't like objects, like just is a minimalist, doesn't want to accumulate anything more. Okay, I found this out. How might you do the empathy in the gift giving situation? Any thoughts? Let's see. I'm going to go back to the chat box here. How might I figure out what my friend loves? Yeah, you got it. Sorry, I'm making you think on this webinar. There's some obvious ways. You know, you might have access to a closer friend, so you could text or ask somebody, their partner, hey, I'm trying to get a gift for Paula. Do you know what would make her happy? Sometimes social media, right? People do post on social media, and you can get a sense of oh, it looks like Paula's really into experiences and specifically loves traveling, right? You might discover. So let's say that's what you've discovered. So in your eagerness to try design thinking, you've done the empathy, and suddenly you're stuck. You can't give chocolate anymore because you know that's not what they want, and you've figured out they really love an experience. So that's where you are. So then if they like an experience, you might go straight to one that feels good for you, which would be, let's say, a cooking class, right? That's a great experience. I was gifted a cooking class once. I loved it. So I got it. And I know they like food because from their social media. So that's not a bad idea. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't take 7 hours to figure this stuff out, right? This is a present for a friend. But as you can see on the visual, is sometimes we just lock in too fast on the first idea. So ideation is really giving yourself space to come up with 5 other options, maybe 10 other options, because you might realize that a food class for somebody, then they have to commit to a certain time. They have to drive somewhere to do it, even though it worked really well for you. Maybe there's another experience that works better, right? So it's, instead of locking in on the first idea you have, it's giving yourself just the space to brainstorm some. And they talk about in design thinking, there's this term I love, it's called the beginner's mindset. The beginner's mindset is, pretend now you have that great idea of a cooking class, but put that aside. Imagine you didn't have that great idea. What, just, we lock into a solution sometimes too fast because we know too much. We've had that very positive experience with cooking classes. So brainstorm. By the way, right brain, left brain, some of design thinking requires analytical thinking. Some of it is more creative thinking. Supposedly, if I believe people who look into their brains, but right brain thinking is supposed to be creative thinking. So this is definitely creative thinking when you come up with many options. But then prototyping is, of the options you generated, is to try one. It may not be perfect. Again, I hack into your lives. My guess is you have a lot going on. Gift giving might be important, but so at some point you just gotta pick your best guess and go with it, right? It's not the only person hopefully you're ever going to give a gift to. So part of it is giving yourself space. You've tried the process. Now it's you pick one, you do it. This idea of doing is the best kind of thinking comes from Tom Chi. Look him up sometime. He's the guy who came up with Google Glasses. He worked at Google X for the longest time, and he finds design thinking so powerful that he left Google X to work on some of the world's most challenging problems. Because he says, you know what, design thinking gives, at least he was talking for himself, gives me the power to solve problems 10 to 100 times faster than traditional approaches. So now the question I ask myself, Tom Chi says, is not, can I solve the problem? Is, what's the problem I should be spending time thinking about? Because he's such a strong believer in the process. I love that idea. It's called creative confidence. When you have the confidence that you can move forward given any problem that's facing you. So then you start picking bigger and bigger problems that are more and more meaningful both to you and to the world, right? Which is why it's a really great fit with social entrepreneurship. Social entrepreneurs often take on big challenges that they feel is going to benefit society. By the way, we do have a course looking at the journey and the tools of social entrepreneurship, but that is a different conversation. So the testing is the last piece of it, because if you put on that design thinking mindset and hat, you're saying that I'm not a perfectionist. I have a process that allows me to move forward in the face of complexity and uncertainty. And I know that I'm not going to, the first time I try something, the second time I try something, it's not going to be perfect. So I have to give myself room to learn. And when I give that first gift, after I followed the process, I really want to get some feedback from my friend and see what could I have done better? How did it work? Did it land? Because there'll be another gift for the next friend. And so it's, again, it's a growth mindset, right? It's, I'm going to learn. What if your friend hated the gift you chose? You failed, you followed the steps, and you failed completely. Please don't send me a hate email. But I would say, email me and say, Mohit, I tried your thing and my friend hated it, because I'll say, let's talk about that. There's a lot of learning in that story, right? Failures, if you avoid looking back at a failure, you avoid all the learning that came with it. But don't waste the opportunity to learn from a good failure. If you landed it and your friend loved it, then it's easy. And then you might get the sense, oh, I'm going to nail it every time. It's not going to happen. So again, design thinking, it comes with a mindset of optimism, but there's some realism built into it, right? Which is this process is not perfect, and what can I learn when it goes wrong? I see a question coming up from Emily. Ask yourself, what can you do differently next time? Yes, love it. Thanks, Emily. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, this the idea that there's a process, and we talked through the 5-step process in giving a gift, right? Try to figure out what would make your friend happy. That's the empathy. Then you define the problem. The problem or the challenge maybe is not giving him or her the thing that's going to make him or her happy, but it's suddenly you found out that it's an experience. And then you ideate, you create lots of options, brainstorm 10, 12 things before you have certain criteria to prototype one. Your criteria might be cost, right? Because if your friend loves experiences, they might love jumping out of a plane with a parachute, but that may be above your budget, right? So when you narrow down and decide what to prototype, that's when you apply your analytical thinking. Your 3 criteria might be, I need to be able to put that experience in place without spending more than half an hour. I have a budget of only about $50, and it must be easy for my friend to take advantage of that experience. If I have a free airline ticket that would send my friend who lives in New York, but my ticket is from Miami to Costa Rica, that just may not be the best kind of experience for my friend. So you may have some criteria that helps you narrow it down. And then we talked about, doing it, prototyping, and seeing what happens. So those are the 5 steps, but there's also a mindset around design thinking. I almost think the mindsets are more important than the steps. And this is probably something that's beyond the scope of this webinar, going into all the mindsets, but we talked about learning from failure. Designers don't expect to nail it every time. They just expect that they're constantly in that learning mode, right? Is there any, when you look at these mindsets, do you have any questions on them? Is there one that you can chat it in the chat box where you're like, what do you mean? Or does it make sense when you look at it? Okay, I'm going to count to 3 to see if anything comes in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm assuming that these mindsets, you're reading them, you're like, yeah, makes sense, makes sense. Embrace ambiguity. I'm so glad you asked, Marissa. To me, if you don't have ambiguity, you don't really need design thinking, right? Because design thinking is not a one-size-fits-all. So if I'm trying to drive, I live close to Miami. Let's say if I was going to drive cross-country, I love the idea of driving cross-country in the United States. So let's say I wanted to get to California, want to do that one day. The ambiguity there is maybe I'll have a flat tire, or, where will I stop for the night or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's let's say a few thousand kilometers. And if I give myself 10 days, I would just backward map that process. I'm very clear on where I want to reach. Let's say I want to get to San Francisco. I have 10 days, let's say, to do that drive. So I know when I want to reach, where I want to reach. I have my car. Then I just plan my trip. There is not that much ambiguity and complexity in that problem. I would just backward map that. Okay. If I were building a bridge, I'd use an engineering approach to building the bridge. There's certain materials, there's certain, tension and things. So so design thinking is particularly relevant when there's complexity, usually thrown in by people, right? You thought you were simple? No, human beings are complex. Yes, even you. Yeah. So the human factor makes it. And so part of the fact that designers love and embrace ambiguity, they realize that we are irrational, complex beings, and they're in love with how do we work with human beings, with societies, with organizations, and come up with optimal solutions. So you have to embrace ambiguity, because people also change their minds. So one of the things designers often do is they check in during the process, right? Architects, a good architect is doing design thinking, because I might say I want this house. If I walk away and then a year later the architect gives me my house, I won't be happy with it. They have to keep checking in with the client. So thanks, Marissa, for that question. Hopefully, any other questions, feel free to chat them in. At some point, we'll either run out of time or I'll have answered all your questions. So moving on. Oh, maybe this is a good time to just talk about the workshop, because I think that'll leave us some time at the end to take some more questions. And Paula, feel free to jump in at any point. So what we found is we focus on change makers, people who are leading in times of complexity. So we have programs on leadership and social innovation. And we found that this course is one of the courses that, whether you're in our diploma program on either on leadership or on social innovation, there's certain benefits. And one of them is just our format, right? Our format it's similar to this, except we tend to have, now we have about 36 people online. Our courses tend to have about half this number. So we do breakout rooms where you can have small group discussions, you come back, so it's really what I would call participant-centered learning, yeah. And then, as you're seeing now, it's just the cohort is always, it's international, and it's people who have a wealth of experience. So the connections that we find come from processes that we offer. We can never know what those connections are going to be, but we make sure to encourage them, and they do happen. And then the idea of, in complex challenges, you may have gone through a 4-week process, but I'm always happy to do a coaching call where you might say, this is the specific challenge I'm working on, and how might design thinking help? So those are a few of the benefits. By the end of the workshop, these are some things that we strive for. But maybe I'll just pick one: emerge with renewed confidence in your innovation skills, and just be ready to apply it to real challenges. Certificate, of course, and that's something that we don't give out lightly. As you'll notice, for the University for Peace, we have the UN logo as part of the University for Peace, and the 4 words are hope for peace, right? So part of it is that we recognize that with kind of professional development comes some responsibility to also take it out and use it in situations where we are contributing to a better future. And this is where I want to reconnect, I think, with the potential of design thinking. So David Kelly is the founder of an organization called, or a company called IDEO. And IDEO is based in the Silicon Valley. And really, IDEO started off with using design thinking to make products, right? So David Kelly, for example, IDEO helped make the first Apple mouse, right? Steve Jobs was involved in that, and then they made, one of the products they make is these ski glasses that don't fog up, just this cool stuff. But then they realized that, this process of design thinking is so, what shall I say, flexible and powerful. We should not just apply it for product development. We should look at maybe innovating services. So then they started working with banks. Banks have often a problem with customer service. So how do we innovate your customer service experience? So then they started working with service sector companies. And then they realized that, by the way, David Kelly was also involved with Stanford schools of engineering. And so then he got students saying, I'm actually not interested in working with businesses at all. I'm in the School of Education. But education is something that we need to reinvent. It was invented and designed for the 20th century, and we're now in the 21st century. And so through a gradual process, now IDEO has IDEO.org, which is all about, I'm sure many of you are from the service sector, from the education sector, working in government. And so they're saying that, this innovation process of design thinking is, yes, it's powerful on the product side, but it's so much more impactful and powerful on the service side when we're thinking about systems. So in fact, my kind of exposure to design thinking came as an educator. I consider myself first an educator, then maybe a social entrepreneur, and then somebody who runs a center for executive education. So it was very powerful to see how these 5 steps can be used across different sectors. And latest, and this is where, Paula, should I tell them about, the empathy piece? Instead of going outward, how can I help somebody else? The latest, I would say, innovation even within the design field is, well, one of the most challenging things is, what am I going to do when I grow up? Right? Everyone's kind of asking themselves that question, however old they are, or
We
whatever.
still are, yeah.
Yeah, whatever stage you are. So you can use the tools of design thinking in terms of thinking about your own future self. And so we've been, we do offer an online course called Designing Your Life, doing exactly that. And in fact, for this design thinking workshop, even though it's mainly, mainly focused on innovation and innovation skills outward, in the last session, when we talk about building your creative confidence, I encourage all the participants to come up with a real personal challenge that they're facing, and the bigger, the better. And then we walk through how could you use design thinking, both the 5 steps and the mindset towards that challenge. So that's about what I wanted to share with you today. I think for me, I hope you're getting a sense that this is something I'm still learning about. The field itself is evolving. I know you wouldn't have taken time to be here today unless you were interested in this, or unless you're already doing a lot of it. So please, this is also an invitation to be in touch. Paula will be following up with my slides. We have links to a couple of resources that might be useful in design thinking. And Paula, maybe this is also, let's open it up for questions, comments, but anything you want to add. And I know we have 5 minutes
definitely.
before
Sure.
you officially end. And like I said, I'm happy to hang out more.
Yes.
I
So we have, oh, go ahead, Mariela.
Sorry, sorry. I have a question. Thank you very much for all this information, very useful. And I don't remember if you share already all the schedule or the times and costs of this workshop. Did you send us an email?
No,
That's what I'll be doing. Yes. I'll be following up with you. We do have the 4-week live virtual, just starting on April the 20th, and it goes until May 11th. And so in the follow-up email I'll send to all of you, you'll get information on that course, the pricing, and we actually have a special offer for everyone that attended this webinar too. So you'll see that in my email.
Those
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Put it up, Mariela. Thanks for your question, though. Yeah. The other thing maybe I should do is, there is a link that, are you seeing my screen now? No, let me.
It's in the gallery.
Yeah. Actually, rather than sharing the link visually, what I'll do is I'll just copy it from the slide and throw it into the chat box. So you can also check it out right at the end of, and that describes a lot of the details, Mariela, you were asking about. Thank you.
Yeah,
Emily?
you'll also get that link from me today as well.
Emily, did you have a question? I see your hand go up. Yeah.
I do. I'd love to hear any brief impact stories you have from people that have participated in this course, and what benefits or outcomes have resulted from being a part of it.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think of it. Unfortunately, what's coming to mind is the most recent story, which may not be the most relevant to this audience. But let me start there, and then a couple more if it pops up. But so I'm working with a group, and they are in an industry where they hire a lot of young people. Right. And so the job doesn't require a whole lot of training to do, but they're finding that these people there's obviously a cost to hiring and recruiting people. And then some of them last a week, some of them last a month, some of them last 3 months, and very few of them actually make it to a year. Right. And part of it is the job is not a fun job. They know that. So what they've come up with within this organization is just this understanding that we're just churning people in and out. It's become like this. We constantly need to be hiring people. When we hire people, we know that they may not last, right? That's become the reality. And so when we did a design thinking process with them, they ended up realizing, right, a lot of this is giving them the right questions and the structure for them to think about what's a better design. And they've come up with the realization that if they switch their mindset and think about the job as not being kind of a call center type job, but oh wow, this is the first professional opportunity of a young person. As leaders, it's such an opportunity to coach them, train them, and really think of them as people who are, if their first career experience in Costa Rica is positive, and I was a mentor to that person, that's a huge opportunity. Versus, oh my God, it's so hard to manage an 18-year-old who's going to transition out probably in 3 months. And that was fantastic to see. And so, of course, how do you do that? One is a big shift in the mindset, right? And then we're also working with them on the second step. Hopefully, they think what are the conditions to help someone who's actually doing a job that on the surface may not feel fun, answering calls to customers who typically aren't happy, and allow them to see the value of the service they're providing and also the possible growth in this organization. And we're focusing on organizational happiness or employee happiness rather than employee effectiveness, which is really tied deeply to our beliefs that work shouldn't be a transaction. I give you time for money, but should be about a larger purpose and meaning. So Emily, sorry, I took a while because I think that story is so relevant and it emerged. We didn't know going into it what issues the leaders were facing, but attrition was the biggest one, retention and attrition. And when we talked to them, we realized they were operating from one mindset and they were able to say, we're willing to try a completely different approach. Thanks for that question, Emily. Yeah. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Let's see, I'm going to pick on the people I see. Adrian, Gerardo, go for it. You unmuted.
Hey, Mohit, how are you?
Doing really well, thanks.
Excellent. Long time no see. I hope everything's all right up there in Florida. I have a question for you, and this has been popping up quite often right now. And I see many companies starting to talk about design sprinting. Yes. What's your take on that? I don't know, I have mixed feelings regarding, design thinking versus design sprinting.
Yeah, Gerardo, can you tell me how long is that sprint? Is it a 3-week sprint? Is it a 10-week sprint? How are they different?
Well, here, I gotta be honest. Here in Costa Rica, I've been working a lot with the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and they've been even talking about 5 days and trying to have something in a 5-day sprint, which for me is kind of crazy and it's too hectic. And I don't know if that if that brings adequate results, basically because it's too hasty. But they don't even talk about doing weeks. They want it, they want the solution ASAP and 5 weeks. 5 days, and if possible, I've heard trying to narrow it down. It even popped up now that you mentioned IDEO with a couple of schools that I've worked with here that they taking into account the pandemic and going to online or blended learning and how to add that differentiating factor to the services that they provide and how to come up with the adequate structure for blended learning. And at the very beginning it was really crazy because schools wanted a solution in 2-3 days. We need to get everyone back on track and telling them take it easy, okay? And here in Spanish is despacio porque llevo prisa. So basically, I don't know, what's your feeling on all this?
Yeah, let me jump in. So a couple of things. One is there's this, and I think David Kelly says this. He says creativity likes constraints, right? So if I'm asked to write a blog post about whatever design thinking, and Paula, you gave me 1 week to write that post, I would take 1 week. If you gave me 50 minutes to write that post, I would do a post in 50 minutes, right? That's the minimum I need to write a blog post. So the idea there, Gerardo, of doing a 5-day sprint, I think might produce a lot of energy and creativity and kind of, produce something that's actually testable then. I've even heard of companies doing a FedEx day. You know, FedEx has this overnight service, 24 hours. So they say, okay, guys, we've been struggling with trying to come up with what's our new diploma offering going to be for months now. Let's have a FedEx day. Nothing else matters, no emails, no meetings. We're all going to come together. And at the end of 24 hours, we're going to have, we're going to prototype our new diploma offering or whatever it is, right? So Gerardo, I kind of like the idea of trying it out. However, the definition of a sprint is that you're putting maximum energy for a short amount of time. So if you keep doing sprints one after another, it leads to burnout and exhaustion, right? There's a cost to kind of having that kind of focus and energy. Secondly, depending on what it is, and this is where I don't want to get, I won't be able to answer very specifically the context. There's some limits to what we can really produce in a short amount of time. But so I like the concept of focused energy. Let's drive to something. I don't like it when it's overused, because often leaders get results in these sprints, but it leaves people exhausting if there's not a recovery period. By the way, the best sprinters in the world, you know, a 100-meter sprint is it's now down to under 10 seconds for sure. But the recovery, it's all about rest, recuperation, training to be able to perform, right? And I think in a lot of environments, I'm not seeing the importance to what happens when the sprint is over. So, but thanks for that question. And sorry, I can't answer it very specifically, but hopefully some thoughts on it.
No, actually it was great. And actually you just hit the nail on the head, basically because, and this is something that it hasn't dawned upon me until you just said it. The fact that after the sprint, you need a long recovery period. So that's actually great advice. And yes, you know, just thinking about it, they do need to, you know, recuperate and, you know, build up that energy again.
Oh, that's, yeah. I'm glad that most welcome. You know, we run a course called Positive Leadership. We run it online, we run it in person, and there's a lot of cool modules in it, from how to have tough conversations to I don't know, just like happiness. But the one that often has people going, wow, I had never thought of that, is the module on managing energy, not time. And Gerardo, to your point, it's all about managing energy, is all about performance followed by rest and recuperation. Our bodies are set up for that, and our organizational systems need to be set up for rest and recuperation incorporated into performance. And often we're not thinking that. We're just trying to optimize, go faster, bigger, better. And therefore, you know, talent acquisition and retention becomes a huge issue in organizations. So yeah. Other thoughts, questions, comments? All right, I know we've gone a little bit over the time you may have blocked on your calendar. And if you have a back-to-back meeting, I would actually suggest talking about rest and recuperation, taking a few minutes break. You know, Zoom, love it because I'm able to, you know, especially the last 12 months, I would have gone, I don't know what I would have done with myself, because I love bringing people together and exchanging ideas, so Zoom has been very flexible, allows that kind of engagement, but it's exhausting because you're having, like, you're staring at yourself, you're staring at a lot of faces. If we were in a meeting in a room, you're looking at one person. The brain is on high alert when you have a lot of eyes on you. So for those of you who don't have your camera on, I'm missing seeing you, and I won't recognize you maybe if I see you again. And it's probably less exhausting than for Emily, Mariela, Gerardo, Adrian. So I appreciate seeing you, and I'm seeing myself, and I try to remember to take breaks between Zoom calls. But I'm happy to stay on. I don't have a back-to-back. So if there are other things, Stuart says, as most of the methods, design sprint is not set up for everything. It depends on the talent, technology, budget, risk, business, industry, and some other issues. It doesn't work for any outcome. Thanks, Stuart. And feel free to private message Gerardo and connect over email if you guys want to chat more. Thanks, Stuart, for adding that. Anything else in terms of, it doesn't have to be a question. You can just say, oh, I've worked with design thinking and I love it, or I hate it. By the way, the nice thing about coming from academia, I'm very like, I love the question, so what? So what are we going to do about something? So I'm very practical. And because I have an academic kind of training, I love anyone. I mean, the idea that someone critiques an approach is great. I didn't come up with design thinking. I'm just, sharing it. So it's always good. And I always encourage people to look at the limitations of something. When is it better not to use design thinking, right? One of them I said, when it's clear where you want to go and there's very controlled levels of uncertainty and ambiguity, then don't use design thinking. Just do a more traditional planning approach. All right, I'm going to release you from me talking. I had a participant in a course last week said, "Mohit, you talk a lot." I'm like, yeah.
But it's a good thing. You have good things to say, Mohit.
Thanks, Paula. So we'll be in touch with all of you. Thank you so much for making time to join us today.
Thank you to everyone. I will be in touch with you after the webinar.
And text, yes, we can send Paula an email and then we'll send you the recording. We'll send the recording only on demand. How's that? Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a
Bye.
lot.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you
Emily. Thanks,
soon.
Gerardo. Thanks.